Susan B. Anthony was a pioneering voice for women's rights who dedicated her entire life to the cause of equality. Susan B. Anthony, one of America's most influential social reformers, was born in Adams, Massachusetts on February 15, 1820. She came from a Quaker family with strong moral convictions. Anthony had a determined and unwavering character. Her family's commitment to social justice was profound. She was educated in her father's school until the age of 17 when she began teaching to help support her family. Then in 1839, the family moved to a farm near Rochester, New York, and the young Susan B. Anthony began her journey into activism, attending meetings and gatherings that would shape her future. Susan B. Anthony never married, choosing instead to devote herself entirely to the cause of social reform. In 1848, when the first Women's Rights Convention was held in Seneca Falls, Anthony was teaching and had not yet joined the movement. She worked as a teacher and headmistress, experiencing firsthand the discrimination women faced in wages and opportunities. She was paid a fraction of what male teachers earned for the same work, and this inequality planted the seeds of her activism. In 1851, Anthony met Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and this meeting would change the course of American history. The two women formed a partnership that would last 50 years. Susan B. Anthony was not initially focused solely on women's suffrage. She began her activism in the temperance movement. Anthony believed that alcohol was destroying families and that women needed legal protections against drunken husbands. In 1852, she was denied the right to speak at a temperance convention because she was a woman. Anthony was outraged by this discrimination and realized that women would never have real power to reform society without the right to vote. She began to see suffrage as the key to all other reforms. Anthony was a tireless organizer who traveled constantly across the country. She gave speeches in small towns and large cities, often facing hostile crowds. Anthony endured ridicule, threats, and even physical violence for her beliefs. People threw rotten eggs at her, shouted insults, and tried to drown out her words. But Anthony never wavered in her commitment to the cause. She believed deeply that women deserved the same rights and opportunities as men. In 1856, Anthony became an agent for the American Anti-Slavery Society. She recognized the connection between the oppression of enslaved people and the oppression of women. Anthony worked alongside Frederick Douglass and other abolitionists to end slavery. During the Civil War, Anthony and Stanton organized the Women's Loyal National League, which collected nearly 400,000 signatures on petitions to abolish slavery. This was the largest petition drive in American history up to that time. After the Civil War ended in 1865, Anthony expected that women would be granted the right to vote along with formerly enslaved men. She was devastated when the 14th and 15th Amendments extended citizenship and voting rights to black men but excluded all women. Anthony felt betrayed by her former allies in the abolitionist movement. Some of her statements during this period reflected the racial prejudices of her time, and she sometimes argued that educated white women deserved the vote more than uneducated black men. This remains a troubling aspect of her legacy. In 1868, Anthony and Stanton began publishing a weekly newspaper called The Revolution. The paper's motto was "Men, their rights and nothing more, women, their rights and nothing less." The Revolution covered women's suffrage, equal pay, labor organizing, and other progressive causes. The newspaper was bold and controversial, advocating for divorce reform and criticizing religious institutions that oppressed women. The Revolution lost money and Anthony went into debt to keep it running. She spent years lecturing to pay off those debts, refusing to declare bankruptcy on principle. Susan B. Anthony believed in direct action and civil disobedience. On November 5, 1872, Anthony did something radical and illegal. She walked into a barbershop in Rochester, New York, that was being used as a polling place, and she registered to vote. The election inspectors were confused and uncertain, but Anthony insisted on her right as a citizen. She argued that the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, gave women the constitutional right to vote. On Election Day, November 18, 1872, Susan B. Anthony cast her ballot for Ulysses S. Grant for president. 2 weeks later, a U.S. Marshal arrived at Anthony's home to arrest her. She was charged with voting illegally. Anthony insisted that the Marshal handcuff her like a common criminal, wanting to highlight the injustice. She was released on bail, which she opposed paying, but her lawyer paid it without her consent. Anthony used her arrest as a platform, giving speeches across the country titled "Is it a crime for a citizen of the United States to vote?" The trial of Susan B. Anthony took place in June 1873 in Canandaigua, New York. The trial was a travesty of justice from the beginning. The judge, Ward Hunt, was openly hostile to Anthony's cause. He had written his decision before the trial even began. When Anthony's lawyer tried to have her testify, the judge ruled that as a woman, she was not competent to testify in her own defense. At the end of the trial, Judge Hunt directed the all-male jury to find Anthony guilty without deliberation. He pulled out a prepared statement and read the guilty verdict himself. Before sentencing, the judge asked Anthony if she had anything to say. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Anthony delivered a powerful speech that became famous throughout the nation. She declared that the court had trampled on her citizens' rights, that she had been denied a trial by a jury of her peers, and that the government was not a democracy but an odious aristocracy. She spoke with passion and fury, refusing to be silenced. The judge repeatedly ordered her to sit down and be quiet, but Anthony continued speaking. Finally, the judge sentenced her to pay a fine of $100. Anthony responded, "I shall never pay $1 of your unjust penalty." And she never did. The government never attempted to collect the fine, likely because forcing payment would have given Anthony grounds for an appeal to the Supreme Court. Susan B. Anthony understood that changing society required changing laws, and changing laws required political organization. In 1869, she and Elizabeth Cady Stanton founded the National Woman Suffrage Association. The organization focused exclusively on securing the vote for women through a constitutional amendment. Anthony served as the organization's vice president and traveling organizer. She crisscrossed the country, organizing local suffrage societies, raising money, and recruiting new activists. Anthony traveled by train, stagecoach, and wagon, enduring uncomfortable accommodations and difficult conditions. She often stayed in supporters' homes, sleeping on couches and working late into the night writing letters and planning strategy. In 1890, the National Woman Suffrage Association merged with a rival organization to form the National American Woman Suffrage Association. Anthony served as president from 1892 to 1900. Under her leadership, the organization grew stronger and more focused. Anthony mentored a new generation of suffrage leaders, including Carrie Chapman Catt and Anna Howard Shaw. She understood that the fight for women's suffrage would outlast her lifetime, and she worked to build an organization that would continue after she was gone. Anthony also worked for other reforms beyond suffrage. She advocated for women's property rights, equal pay for equal work, and educational opportunities for women. She supported the admission of women to universities and professional schools. Anthony believed that women needed economic independence to be truly free. She encouraged women to learn trades and enter professions traditionally reserved for men. Anthony herself was financially independent, supporting herself through lecturing and writing. In 1888, Anthony helped organize the International Council of Women in Washington, D.C. Delegates from 53 women's organizations and 9 countries attended. The conference demonstrated that the movement for women's rights was global. Anthony traveled to Europe several times, meeting with suffragists and reformers from other nations. She understood that the struggle for equality was universal and that women around the world faced similar obstacles. Susan B. Anthony was a complex person with contradictions in her character and beliefs. She was warm and generous with friends but could be demanding and inflexible about the cause. She had a sharp sense of humor and enjoyed social gatherings, but she also worked herself to exhaustion. Anthony never sought personal glory or wealth. She lived modestly, often wearing the same black dress to speaking engagements. Any money she earned from lectures went to support the suffrage movement. Anthony sacrificed marriage and children for her work, though she maintained close friendships and was devoted to her family. Her relationship with Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the most important partnership of her life. Stanton was the writer and philosopher, while Anthony was the organizer and strategist. Stanton would write speeches and Anthony would deliver them. They complemented each other perfectly. Stanton once said that she forged the thunderbolts and Anthony fired them. The two women were inseparable for decades, though they sometimes disagreed on tactics and priorities. Their friendship endured until Stanton's death in 1902. By the turn of the 20th century, Susan B. Anthony had become a revered figure in American life. Younger activists called her Aunt Susan with affection and respect. Newspapers that had once mocked her now praised her dedication and character. Presidents and politicians sought her endorsement. But Anthony remained focused on the goal that had eluded her for 50 years, a constitutional amendment guaranteeing women the right to vote. In 1900, at the age of 80, Anthony retired as president of the National American Woman Suffrage Association. She continued to work for the cause, attending conventions and giving speeches. Her health began to decline, but her spirit remained strong. Anthony knew she would not live to see women vote, but she never lost faith that victory would come. In February 1906, Anthony attended her last suffrage convention in Baltimore. She was 86 years old and weak from illness. She gave a short speech to the delegates, her voice frail but determined. Her final public words were, "Failure is impossible." Those words became the rallying cry for the suffrage movement. 1 month later, on March 13, 1906, Susan B. Anthony died of heart failure and pneumonia at her home in Rochester, New York. Anthony did not live to see the 19th Amendment ratified in 1920, 14 years after her death. The amendment, which finally granted women the right to vote, became known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment in honor of her lifelong work. Her face appeared on the dollar coin in 1979, making her the first woman to be honored on U.S. currency. Today, her home in Rochester is a National Historic Landmark and museum dedicated to her memory and the suffrage movement. Susan B. Anthony's legacy extends far beyond the right to vote. She helped transform American society by challenging the fundamental assumption that women were inferior to men. Anthony argued that women were full human beings deserving of equal rights, equal opportunities, and equal respect. This was a radical idea in the 19th century, and it remains the foundation of modern feminism. Anthony understood that legal equality was necessary but not sufficient. She believed that women needed to change their own consciousness to see themselves as powerful and capable. The suffrage movement that Anthony led was not perfect. It sometimes excluded women of color and failed to address the intersection of racism and sexism. Working-class women and immigrant women often felt unwelcome in suffrage organizations dominated by educated, middle-class white women. Anthony herself made statements that reflected the prejudices of her era. These failures and limitations must be acknowledged as part of her complex legacy. But Anthony's fundamental message remains powerful and relevant. She insisted that democracy cannot exist when half the population is denied basic rights. She demonstrated that ordinary people, through organization and persistence, can change unjust laws. She showed that social progress requires sacrifice and that no single generation will complete the work of justice. Anthony understood that movements succeed when they build institutions, develop leaders, and maintain focus over decades. Susan B. Anthony never married, never had children, and never held political office. She devoted her entire adult life to a cause that seemed hopeless to many of her contemporaries. She endured mockery, arrest, and exhaustion. She died without seeing her goal achieved. Yet her life was not a failure. Anthony helped build a movement that changed America and inspired similar movements around the world. She proved that one person, through dedication and courage, can make history. Anthony's methods of activism remain relevant today. She understood the power of grassroots organizing, of building coalitions, of using the media to spread her message. She knew that changing minds required patience and repetition. Anthony gave the same speech hundreds of times in towns across America, knowing that each audience was hearing these ideas for the first time. She wrote thousands of letters, organized countless meetings, and mentored dozens of younger activists. This unglamorous work of movement building was her true genius. Susan B. Anthony also understood the importance of symbols and dramatic action. Her illegal vote in 1872 and subsequent trial brought national attention to the suffrage cause. The trial was a defeat in legal terms, but a victory in terms of publicity and moral authority. Anthony knew how to turn setbacks into opportunities. When opponents attacked her, she used their attacks to demonstrate the injustice of denying women political rights. Anthony's relationship with power was complex. She sought political influence but never political office. She lobbied presidents and members of Congress, but she remained an outsider. This position gave her moral authority and freedom to speak truth to power. Anthony was not constrained by party loyalty or political calculation. She could say what needed to be said, even when it was unpopular or inconvenient. The woman suffrage movement that Anthony led was part of a broader transformation of American society in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The progressive era saw reforms in labor conditions, food safety, education, and political participation. Women activists were at the forefront of many of these reforms. Anthony understood that women's suffrage would accelerate social progress by giving women political power to advocate for change. Susan B. Anthony's life spanned a remarkable period in American history. She was born when slavery was legal and women had almost no legal rights. She lived through the Civil War, Reconstruction, industrialization, and the rise of America as a world power. She witnessed the expansion of democracy to include formerly enslaved men, though not yet women. Anthony saw tremendous change in her lifetime, and she helped create much of that change. Today, Susan B. Anthony is remembered as one of the most important figures in American history. Schools, streets, and organizations bear her name. Her birthday is celebrated as a day to honor women's equality. But Anthony would not want to be remembered as a saint or a symbol. She was a real person who made mistakes, held some problematic views, and sometimes alienated potential allies. She was also brave, principled, and utterly committed to justice. The story of Susan B. Anthony reminds us that social change is possible but never easy. It requires vision, organization, persistence, and sacrifice. It requires building movements that can sustain themselves across generations. Anthony understood that she was part of a long struggle that began before her birth and would continue after her death. She accepted her role in that struggle with grace and determination. Susan B. Anthony's most important legacy may be her example of how to live a meaningful life. She chose a difficult path and never wavered from it. She found purpose in working for something larger than herself. She built deep friendships and found joy in the struggle. Anthony proved that a life of activism and commitment can be fulfilling, even when success seems distant. She showed that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they dedicate themselves to a just cause. In the end, Susan B. Anthony was right. Failure was impossible. The cause to which she devoted her life ultimately triumphed. Women won the right to vote, and that victory opened doors to countless other opportunities and rights. The work is not finished. Women still face discrimination and inequality in many areas of life. But the foundation that Anthony helped build remains strong. Her words and example continue to inspire new generations of activists fighting for equality and justice. Susan B. Anthony was, even in death, a unifying force for progress and human dignity.